Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, it's story time at the Layer. I'm going to be telling you my story of how I got into goth music and the goth culture. We could call this episode Metalhead in a Goth World, or a Metalhead's journey into goth. It's easy to understand how these people could be interested in both of these cultures, because they do share a lot of similarities, right? If I give you the imagery of castles and graveyards and bats and vampires, these are all things that metalheads love. These are things that goths love. The clothing style, dressing in black. In fact, my style, as much as I can say that I have a style of dressing, is very influenced and informed by goth. If you haven't noticed, I don't wear band shirts on my channel. I did a little bit in the beginning, but I got away from that. And that was because I wanted to do something different, and I was starting to build a wardrobe. I won't say I have a huge wardrobe, but I do have some nice pieces in my closet that are very goth influenced, and I wanted to start wearing that on the channel. Maybe at some point, maybe I'll do a video where I'll show you some of the stuff that I have, do like a fashion video. We'll see, but maybe I'll show you some of the jewelry and the vests and stuff that I like to buy and that I like to wear. I get a lot of my stuff from, there's a place not too far from where I live called Ravens and Rockers that carries like goth and rock stuff, and that's where I get like almost all my vests and my jewelry and stuff like that. So for me, metal is my main type of music that I listen to. But after that, it would probably be classical music, number two. And then number three, but a really close number two, would be goth music. Mostly the electronic, dark wave type of stuff. You've heard me sometimes reference electronic music on here. Well, that's where I'm kind of coming from with that. The more dark wave, goth inspired electronic stuff. And I do like some of the classic stuff too, like The Cure. So let's go back. Let me tell you about the first time I had any sort of experience or contact with the world of goth. I was probably 12 or 13. My parents would take me to the mall, drop me off to hang out with my friends, or they would just go shopping and I'd walk around. And if you're of my age, you remember that the mall was a place where everybody socialized. You'd go to the movies, you'd go to the food court. Friday and Saturday night, all your friends were there. So there used to be this girl, and she was probably only like 17 or 18. But when you're 12 years old, a girl who's 18 seems so much older than you, so mature, right? So there was this girl, and she had the classic Morticia Addams hair, not the bangs, but like the side part, really long, straight black hair. She'd wear a long black dress with like frilly sleeves, and she had these things that hung down when she opened up her arms, and her dress sort of dragged on the ground behind her like a wedding gown almost, and she'd wear these black boots and everything. And I'd see this girl and was just like, oh my gosh. I mean, it is like frozen in my memory, this girl, like a snapshot in time. I could take you to that mall and show you like exactly where this picture in my mind is of that girl, because I can just remember it like it was yesterday. And I just remember seeing this girl and being like, oh my gosh, look at her. I mean, she is just so beautiful. I like to think that I've always liked girls with black hair. I'd like to think that that's probably what sparked that for me. My wife has very beautiful long black hair. But this girl would walk around the mall, and she would just walk down the main walkway there, the main corridor. And she would just slowly walk, her head looking forward. She'd never look at anybody. She'd never window shop. She'd just slowly walk back and forth, knowing darn well that everybody is looking at her. And at the time, I had no idea what that was. I just thought, maybe I probably made a connection like, oh, she's kind of like a horror movie, vampire type of thing. But I had never heard the expression goth. I didn't know what any of that meant. This is the early 80s at this point. So then the next step for me was probably when before I got married, I lived in a house with a group of people. And there was one of the guys in the house had a friend, and her and her boyfriend were goths, and they would come over the house and I would talk to them, and they were, full blown, the outfits, and it'd be Monday afternoon and they were dressed up like they were ready to go to the club. And I would talk to her about, hey, what is this? And talk to, her boyfriend. And they sort of started to explain the goth subculture to me. She was a show promoter, used to put on shows. I regret at the time, I remember her saying to me, why don't you come to one of our shows? And I should have, I would have, in hindsight, would have loved to have been able to go to like a goth club in the early 90s. But she was very much into the more industrial type of look and sound. At this time, Marilyn Manson was just starting to come around. And yes, I know goths, they do not like it when people say Marilyn Manson is goth. I get it. But at this time, Marilyn Manson was like just getting started. And I remember her talking about him and like other stuff like that, that kind of industrial Nine Inch Nails and stuff like that. So that's kind of what she was into. So that's the connection that I made to goth then for a while. It wasn't until then, probably the next big step for me it's probably like the late 90s now. I had written some original instrumental music that was kind of atmospheric and creepy and slightly orchestral. And I had it up on this website called SoundClick. This is before Napster and all that stuff. I don't even know if SoundClick exists anymore. And people used to be able to link to your songs. And I was starting to notice that people were linking to my music from this site called Vampire Freaks. And anybody who knows what Vampire Freaks was, it doesn't exist anymore. For those who don't, it was like a goth MySpace. And I believe it even existed before MySpace. It was, personal pages and people would have music on them and pictures and everything like that. But it was all goths and alternative type stuff. So that was probably the next step where I started seeing this like, okay, and starting to make this connection with the type of music that they listen to. And at that time, now we're talking the late 90s, early 2000s. It's stuff like Evanescence and stuff like that. I also at that time started to really get into more gothic-y type literature. I remember there was this magazine that I can't remember the name of it. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of this magazine, but it would have like these kind of like vampires and pictures of vampires and drawings and paintings and stuff like that. And it would talk about music. I remember I discovered some like more atmospheric and some of the electronic stuff. This was maybe the first time that I started to like dabble and listen to electronic stuff. And right around that time, I started really getting into collecting pictures of cemetery angels. That's something that I've always just loved. Then the next big thing for me, this was a big leap for me. It was right around when I moved to Florida about 10 years ago, and I discovered this podcast called Cemetery Confessions. And I'm going to link down below to the Cemetery Confessions. They have a YouTube page as well as the podcast page. And Cemetery Confessions is two guys, Trey and Danny, and they're both goths. And the podcast talks a lot about the goth lifestyle, the culture, fashion, just everything about being a goth. They talk about music on there, but there's a lot of stuff about sort of the culture and the goth outlook on life and goth philosophy and art and film, goths in art and film and music and all that stuff. And that was hugely influential on me. In fact, that podcast sort of influenced my YouTube channel in a lot of ways, because with my YouTube channel, I wanted to talk about other things like about the heavy metal lifestyle and the heavy metal culture and being a metalhead. And that was directly influenced by Cemetery Confessions. So hearing them talk about the culture, and I also started hearing them talk about the history of the music, where it came from. Like it came out of punk music, Joy Division, and then that led to The Cure and Susie and the Banshees and Bauhaus and stuff like that. And when they first said these things, I was like, whoa, The Cure? That's goth music? Friday I'm in Love? Just like Heaven? That was like the only stuff I really knew from The Cure at the time. I thought, that's goth? Because it made me think back to when I was in college in the late 80s, early 90s. And I had friends that were into that type of music, but they weren't goths. At that time, we considered that type of music college rock or alternative. This was alternative before it became the alternative in the 90s, what alternative came to mean in the 90s. So I lumped The Cure and Susie and the Banshees, Sisters of Mercy. I lumped all that stuff in with like REM and XTC and all the other college rock stuff that you would hear on the radio. But listen to these two guys talk about the culture. It helped me learn the culture. It helped me learn about the history and sort of the lineage of the music. They make recommendations and stuff like that. In fact, I would love to have those guys here on the channel. I know the one guy, Danny, he has a background, started off listening to metal, and Trey, I believe he has some sort of musical background, because I hear him talk about scales and notes and stuff like that. So I think it would be awesome if I could get those guys on here and give us sort of a history of the goth music and maybe some essential albums, recommended albums for metalheads and hard rockers and stuff like that. So guys, if you're out there, send me a message. Let's work something out. And then, so that was huge for me. That really started to help me understand the culture, the literature, and just how the whole thing worked. And then the next step for me was discovering the scene in Tampa. And you wouldn't think here in Florida, you would think Florida, beaches, sunshine, this would drive any goths, away, right? But that's not the case. Tampa has a really, really great goth scene. I'm going to be making a video in the future. One of them I want to be, I don't know if I mentioned this already, just showing people around the Tampa area, places you can go to if you're a rocker, a metalhead, a goth, stuff like that, nightclubs, bars, places to hang out, record stores, stuff like that. The other thing that I want to do is a video on how to create a scene in your town. And I'm going to be directly using the Tampa goth scene as my reference, because they have built a really great scene here. And I would say it revolves around a couple of different things, a couple of different elements. There's 2 YouTube channels and podcasts that are local that are really important, and that were important for me too, in helping me discover new music and stuff. One of them is called Obscura Undead, and those are 2 girls. And sometimes guests come in, and they talk more about new music, so that keeps me in touch a little bit with more newer music, and they talk about some local scene things. The second is a group called Communion After Dark, and they do a thing called Communion After Dark Radio. They do it as a podcast, and they also put it up on YouTube. I'll link to both of these things down below, so you can please check them out. And Communion After Dark is 3 DJs that they get together. They do sets of 3 or 4 songs, and then they talk, and they do another 3 or 4 songs. And the podcast, every Monday it comes out. It's like over 2 hours long, and that's where I discover all kinds of great electronic music. They do all electronic type stuff on that, like dark wave and EBM and hardy dark EBM and stuff like that. So I've discovered tons of music from that. And the people involved in Communion After Dark also bring a lot of great shows to the Tampa area, and there's some cool clubs, the Crowbar, New World Music Hall at the New World Brewery, that host these shows. And so Communion After Dark is very active in the scene and bringing in shows. They do this festival every year called Absolution Fest, which is just super cool. It's like a 2-day thing where they bring in all kinds of different goths and electronic acts. That stuff, the shows and everything, tend to take place in this area of Tampa called Ybor City. And in Ybor, this is another sort of central thing, I believe, to the goth scene here in this area, is a place called the Castle, and it's sort of a legendary club. It's been around since the 90s. It's 2 stories, multiple rooms, multiple DJs. The decor in it is just awesome. It's dark, spooky, castle-like, goth-like. The music that they play is like the dark wave, harder, darker electronics type stuff. And I just love that place. I am there. Whenever I can go there, I go there. Unfortunately, it's only open on Fridays and Saturdays, but it's a super popular place. It's super cool. I love it. And right around the street from the castle, literally like a block and around the corner from the castle, is a place called the Speakeasy, which is 2 stories. Upstairs is a kava bar. Downstairs, what they call the catacombs, is they serve alcohol. And the whole place is decked out in sort of a dark, horror, goth vibe. And downstairs in the catacombs, where they serve the alcohol, they have a DJ booth, and they'll play music. They have video screens where there's videos playing. Just a super cool place. So all these things, the Obscura Undead, Communion After Dark, the people in the scene, they're very active. They're very supportive. They come out to shows. It just creates this really great scene here. And that's been really influential on me, being able to go to shows, being able to go to the castle and the Speakeasy, being able to meet people, talk to people, learn about the music, learn about the culture. That's been huge for me. So those are the key elements for me. Maybe if I were to go back and summarize, it'd be Morticia Addams at the mall, the girl that looked like Morticia at the mall. Probably next, discovering Vampire Freaks. Number 3 was this big one, Cemetery Confessions. And probably the fourth thing is the Tampa goth scene in general, Communion After Dark and Obscura Undead. So there you go. That's my journey into the world of goth, my experiences in the world of goth. I'm going to be linking down below these podcasts and shows that I talked about. Please check those out. Let me know about your experiences. Do you like some of the music? Have you ever been to a goth club? Do you have any friends that are goths? What do you think of? Do you like this dark wave and dark electronic type of music? What are your experiences and thoughts about the goth world, the music, the culture, and everything like that? You let me know down below in the comments. And till we see you again, stay dark, my friends.